Did everybody grab a new schedule?
Professor, is our final the persuasive speech or something else?
It's the persuasive speech.
Uh-oh.
So let's go over this, and then I'll tell you about some options that I'm thinking about as well. So today we're going to go over your persuasive patterns of organization and your thesis development. Please note that, and it says it also up on the board, that your persuasive topics, or this thesis, proposition, and general purpose, much like you did for the informative speech, is going to be due this Saturday at noon. So you'll have some time to prepare it over the next couple days. Note that I will, of course, give you feedback on that topic and tell you if things need to be adjusted or what needs to be changed. And then you'll have until Sunday at noon to make those changes. Now again, if you're not going to be around and you're not anywhere, feel free to go ahead and email me. Even as soon as like this afternoon, we can work out your details, and then from there you can simply go ahead and post it knowing that you don't have to go back in and check it. So keep that in mind, that those are going to be things that are due and to keep up on over the weekend. On the 14th, we're going to start talking about developing an argument and how to make clear arguments. Rather than simply informing our audience now, we're going to be having this, what we call a mental dialogue, whereby informative speaking, we're like, this is McDonald's, this is what the city of Paris is, this is how healthcare works, as I go through just everybody's. So when we present that information, our audience takes it in, it's like, okay, yeah, that's basic information. It's set up really also in your general purpose, that today I'm here to simply inform you about this information. When it comes time for persuasion, that's when the dialogue with our audience changes. Rather than them just taking in this passive information, it now becomes a mental dialogue that we start to do with the audience. That when we assert a claim, our audience, based upon their own understanding or their own positionality on the topic, is going to be asking questions, well, where's the evidence for that? Well, what proof do you have? Well, why do you think that's so? Or give me something that, how do you understand that, why does drinking soda lead to obesity? That seems like a huge jump, that if I have a Coca-Cola, I'm going to become obese, right? So there's different ways that we have to start to structure our particular main points in order to make effective and clear arguments. And this same type of argumentation will help you not only in this class, but it will help you in asserting your own arguments for the future and hopefully throughout the writing process that you have throughout the rest of your college career. On the 16th, like I said, we don't have class that day. I'll be in Mexico, so that's that. Guess I'm going. So here I'm going to be reading some chapters. They're really easy readings on ethos and pathos. These are what are called Aristotle's proofs. And then you'll have an assignment that'll be due that night by midnight to Canvas. So I'll put those readings up there this weekend so that you can have them and get going if you ever wanted to work ahead. But please note that you don't have to turn it in until that day.
No.
Then when we return, we'll do something with logos. You are also going to have an assignment that will be due over that weekend. And I'm going to go over all of this with you, so don't worry. But it'll be a rough skeleton of your outline. When I say a rough skeleton, I'm literally like, this one would be more like what you would think of in an outline, like literally 1 or 2 words for each point, just so that I know you know where you're going and you're organized correctly. We don't have class on Thanksgiving, actually, so yay. Let's do that. Then the 20th and the 30th, those are both public speaking workshops, or persuasive speaking workshops. So you're going to bring in one main point from your persuasive speech outline to the best of its ability, and then we're going to do peer evaluations of each other. Then this next day, that Thursday that you come, what we'll do is we'll bring in not only a revised version of that first one, but then again a second main point that you're going to go into. So, and we'll peer review in that way. Now, we can, of course, complete this class before your other finals begin. And if you're interested in doing that, I'm more than happy to assist us in doing that. And that's what I have the schedule worked out thus far. Grab a new schedule. What you see down here is December 5th and December 7th. And both of these days are days that we could do our persuasive speeches. But as you'll see, they're going to require people to come in around the hours of when our class actually is. So for all of us, it would be like some of us can meet during our regular time, and then what it would be is meeting for the hour after. That would be 6 of us. But here's the deal, is that if you come in during that 9:30 to 11 time, our usual class time, you don't have to come to that hour after, obviously. Like, I can only keep you in class the times that you're allowed to be in class, so just note that. And that can go on for those 2 days, the December 5th and the December 7th. The other option is to take the 5th, and we can continue to do work. And then we could start speeches on the 7th, and whatever we don't finish there, we just do on our actual final day. So the people who are going to deliver on the 7th, deliver on the 7th, and the people who want to wait till the final, just do it on the final day. What I want you to do is go ahead and read through that. We'll take a vote next week, maybe on Tuesday. I want you to look at your other schedules, look at what your other finals hold, look at your timing and what you can and can't do, and then you all will just like do this little democratic vote. Sound good? All right. So that is the schedule. And did everybody has a new one? Yes. It's already all available to you on campus as well. I emailed it. Tell me crazy. It is. Yeah. Okay, good. So at least we walked through it in that way.
Professor,
Yeah.
did you email a copy of this stuff?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Is that what you just said?
Yeah, and there's one on Canvas just in case.
Okay.
as
Thank
well.
you very much.
Yeah, no worries. There's a couple different ways you can see it. So what I'm going to have you do first is open up your packet to page 10, and we're going to take a look at the persuasive speech. And this is simply the prompt as a friendly reminder of things that you will be required to do. Beyond, so if we're looking at page 10, as it says at the top, persuasive speaking, I think that people, when they think about persuasive speaking, oftentimes think, oh my gosh, I'm going into battle. This is something I'm going to have to do. I'm going to have to convince them. They're never going to believe me. So like I'm already like armed with all my knowledge and like every type of thing that I can think of that I may be going to need when I go into this experience. But as you see in the definition here, the description right at the top, the persuasive speaking is the act in the process of changing, sure, but also what? Does it say there? Reinforcing, absolutely. Because think about it. If I was today to persuade you not to smoke cigarettes, how many of us in this class don't smoke cigarettes already? You already bought into that ideal. This is simply a reinforcement and a reminder. You are constantly persuaded all day long with reinforcements and reminders. And whether they're subliminal or it's advertising. But if you think about even how you were reared as a child, or the lessons that you learned, whether it was in your family unit or school, or even like through a church that you belonged to. Your parents even taught you like about strangers, maybe per se. And you knew the first time, like, oh, that's a stranger. Oh, no, don't do that. But they continued to tell you about strangers, and don't do that, and don't talk to strangers, and remember, don't go out and talk continuously throughout your life. And it was just reinforced, even though you already believed it. So that by the time you got around to being in that situation, you knew exactly what to do. And that's the same idea as the reinforcement of this element of persuasion as well, that we're just reinforced with these ideas. So it's the changing or the reinforcement of one's beliefs, their values, their attitudes, or their actions. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as we get closer. You're going to be required to conduct research for this speech, of course. And you will be required to have at least 3 outside sources again. Your speech will more than likely demand that you have more than 3, potentially even like 5, if you will, because we are going to be working much more with the persuasive elements that we're going to need to be providing evidence beyond generalized factual information or specific definitions. You are going to need to be examining expert ideals, statistics, opinions, perspectives, and using them to support the claims that you are making. Because without those, it's a bunch of because they said so. And nobody likes to be told to do something because they said so. Also, it's like, why am I going to trust you? So we're going to need that evidence. And also this may be where we start to generate a good amount of statistics. And so we will talk about the different types of supporting materials that are necessary depending upon the type of speech that you give. There's these things called propositions that we'll talk about today. And those propositions will determine whether or not maybe it's more important to use statistics or maybe it's more important to utilize a visual aid, because depending upon the psychology of your audience, those choices have already been looked at, they've been researched for years, and it can be a helpful strategy rather than simply giving an anecdote that something else may be more effective. So with that, what I want you to also think about is coming up with new research. What's new? What's fresh? What's exciting? So if we're talking about the smoking idea again, like we've seen those smoking commercials, like the person with the trachea, right? Or on the side of cigarette packs, they put scary pictures of lungs. Or like there's like the ghost grandpa that the baby walks through. But people are still smoking, right? So clearly those types of PSAs or those types of persuasive messages aren't ones that are affecting those individuals. 1, because they're addicted, but 2, it's potentially not playing on a value or an attitude or belief that they already have, that's existent, that's relevant to them. So finding out new information is going to be key to not only keeping your audience entertained and of course keeping them in this like focus of goodwill, showing that you have done the research for them, but it's also going to be really important for you to find new research because, well, there's just so many different ways to do things now. Let's put it that way. That there are so many different avenues that we can think about as to how to give people information or to take ideas. There's social media. There's different forms of being able to find out what's new and what's fresh and what's exciting. And things develop every day technologically, socially. There are social movements and activists out there who are doing something. Little campaigns here and there, grassroots movements, passing out flyers. There are so many different ways and things that we can learn about and that we can use within our presentation to really hopefully persuade our audience. This is a 5 to 7 minute speech. I know it doesn't say they're on there. It's in the syllabus, so feel free to write that on your description. It's 5 to 7 minute speech, so it's all within the same amount of time. You'll still be required to turn in a preparation outline to me. Remember that preparation outline is everything that you intend to say. It's going to have keywords and phrases, or not keywords and phrases. It'll be utilizing the same type of symbolization and indentation. It'll be the same MLA format that we did before. Remember citing resources correctly inside the outline as well as in a works cited page, and then hearing those sources stated out loud. And remember, when we state our sources out loud, those types of information that we hear are things like the author, the author's title, publication, article title, and year. And if we don't have all that information, remember it's like a website or something. Give as much as you can, but also give credibility to that website so that it has some kind of grounding, and that will also help us to be more likely persuaded. So, yeah,
So it's just gonna look like the same outline that we did before. Okay, the one because with the Roman numerals.
Mhm.
Okay.
Same thing. Same thing, yeah. Absolutely. The introduction and Roman numerals. Conclusion. No, there's 11. You're welcome. The other thing is that we want to make sure that we're also following all of our elements of delivery, right? Making sure that we are working on eliminating our vocalized pauses, that we're delivering extemporaneously, meaning speaking to our audience, and you're also going to be required to have a visual aid in the speech. So keep all of those things in mind as you go forward. This is simply a guideline and a prompt, but I'm going to go forward with how to structure your speech, and that all starts with coming up with an effective thesis statement. So how do we get to that thesis statement so that we know exactly what our speech is about and how we are going to communicate that to our audience most effectively? On the back page of that persuasive speech description, there's a checklist, of course, of things that you need, and then also your evaluation sheet that you will turn in for that day. So keep that in mind as you go forward as well. But in the meantime, let's turn over to page, and I believe it's 33.
Just make sure that's right. Oh, goodness. No. No.
Yeah, 33. Wow, I was right. Okay. Oh, this is fine. 33. So persuasive speaking and organizing your topic. So let's get started here with persuasive speaking and organizing your topic. What I want to do, though, first is that there is a line that says persuasive speaking. We just went over that definition. Anybody want to remind me of that definition? It was at the top of the last page. It was the act of changing good. Just write this down. You don't have to read it to me. Just write it down. So it's the act of reinforcing or changing one's beliefs, values, attitudes, or actions. So it's the act of changing or reinforcing one's beliefs, values, attitudes, or actions. And that's our definition of persuasive speaking. And I want to go over each of those elements with you before we dive in. I'm going to move this forward a little bit so our audience can see. Here, this is my amazing drawing of a person. I just like to think of this as a person. Clearly. They're smiling face. So I made these 3 circles here. We have on the core, the most inner part of us, I like to use it mentally in this way, are our beliefs. Then on the next outer ring are our values, and then there's these things called attitudes. So what are beliefs? Beliefs are things that we believe to be true. Absolutely, what we believe to be true. And if any of you grew up with any kind of like religious background, did anybody in this class? It assists in understanding this process a bit more. The belief, this truth that you have about something or whoever this deity is that you believe in, that kind of core truth is something, for example, that never really leaves you. Those are things that are grounded, those are things that are embedded. If you're believing in that ideal and in that truth, really a lot of the other elements of your life and decisions that you make are going to come from that. It's on the innermost part because beliefs are our most hard to change. And that's the most difficult to address our audience with. But moving from the beliefs, and as a result of our beliefs, we come to these things called values, our own personal values. And values are what we can see as things that are good or bad, whether they're right or wrong, moral or immoral, just or unjust, right, better or best. These values that we have towards situations, towards topics, towards individuals, towards people, are traditionally based upon those beliefs. So like if I go back to the religious example, whatever your religious belief was, there's potentially probably some kind of doctrine that you followed as well, whether that be like a Bible, the Quran, whatever it is. Those values are very clearly laid out in that type of doctrine. That this is what is good behavior, this is what is right behavior, this is what is just behavior. And that's not only in like how we will maybe treat people, but how we see situations in the world around us. These values will oftentimes influence like how we approach different things in the world around us. So the values are a little bit easier to change. And I always give this example because I went to a really like strict Christian school growing up. It was black and it was white. Like there was no middle ground. Things were good and things were bad. And if you were bad, you were always going to hell. So, panic. Anyway, so my values were very also strong in high school. Like I saw things as very black and white, very clearly. This is wrong behavior, this is right behavior. But then I got out of that environment. And I went to college. And I started to meet all these other people. And I started to meet people from different backgrounds and different experiences and different things that they had gone through. And so for what I would always see as something that was like wrong or bad or oh my gosh, in that particular circumstance for that individual, I see how they could have definitely seen it as the right choice or the only way to do something or the just way of handling something. So oftentimes our values can be changed in the way that we see things as good or bad or right or wrong, especially when we are exposed to different ideas. And this is where being exposed to different people's positions in the world or trying to get us to see how their lives are different or what types of circumstances would lead somebody to do an action that you would have never imagined doing before, but you're like, well, you had to do it. Of course that's what you did. And of course you would protect your kid. Of course you would protect your animal, whatever it is. So these values can shift. But then the last one that we have here are your attitudes. And your attitudes are usually those easiest ones to change. Your attitudes have to do with your likes and your dislikes, or one's likes and dislikes. Anybody in here eat sushi? Okay. For those of you who just raised your hand, were any of you like the others in here who maybe aren't eating sushi? Like, I'm not eating sushi, that's disgusting. I'm not eating raw fish, yes? Were you like that the first time? Okay, yeah, absolutely. And I was the same way. And I was like, no, I don't like it. And somebody would say, well, have you ever tried it? Yeah, and I'd be like, no. And you're like, well, then how do you know that you don't like it, right? It's just an attitude that we have towards something. Like raw fish, I've always been like, oh, that's new to me, and it's weird, it's different, attitudes. So, once we're exposed to something, we can often change it. So for those of you who are like, I'm not trying it, did your friends take you out and they were like, here, try like this California roll or a shrimp tempura roll, the gateway roll drug, as I like to call it, to sushi. And then you tried it and you're like, yay! And then you're like, I just want to let you know that that's how it would go, friends, if that happens. Likes and dislikes are much easier to change. And even if you think about like, oh God, like I don't like country music. And then all of a sudden somebody exposes you to a type of country music you never thought about. And you're like, oh, well that was interesting. Or like an actor, like Zac Efron, what? Guy from High School Musical? And then I'm like, what? Zac Efron from Neighbors? I love Zac Efron, right? So just those likes and those attitudes can change. I hate roller coasters. I hate roller coasters, period. I've always hated roller coasters. And I know it's not really a roller coaster, but Space Mountain at Disneyland. I hate it. It's like the biggest roller coaster that I've ever ridden. And so this last time, it was my 4th time riding it because I get peer pressured in, or people are like, well, maybe you just didn't like it then, or maybe you just try it one more time. So like, I'll try it. And this 4th time, I was like, I'm never riding that ride again, ever. I dislike it, I know it, and I'm sitting there on it. So likes and dislikes can be changed, but they can also be things that you're like, The key here is that your beliefs, your values, your attitudes can all also potentially influence the actions that you take. So if you think about like the beliefs that you have or what you value, your values can have you take action on like, oh my gosh, I'm seeing a bad situation. I need to step up and do something. You value potentially education. So maybe like one of those things that you take action on every day is like, I don't know, making sure that you're on time or that you attend class or that you go to office hours. And that would be an action that you take. The other idea, like I believe that it's good to help others. So yeah, the action that I'm going to take is to become an organ donor or to donate blood. So our beliefs, our values, and attitudes can also influence the actions that we take. And they oftentimes, and I would say more than likely, we run through this scale before we ever engage in the action to begin with. So the thing about each of our values is that they are relative to everybody. Each of us have our own different types of values. What's good for one person may not be good for another. And that comes from our background, our culture, our gender, our sexuality, our religion. All of those things determine the way that we navigate life. So it's important that we start to take into, of course, consideration our audience and some of the values that they do in fact have. So now that we know this idea of persuasion, or what persuasion is really revolving around, it's our act of like kind of reinforcing some of these elements throughout our speech in order to get our audience to passively agree with us or maybe to get up and take some action on something. So in this case, you are going to come up, again, for your homework with your general purpose, a proposition, and then a thesis statement, which you'll see written over there, and we'll go over that in time. But how are you, this new part that you're seeing here is that it used to be the general purpose, the specific purpose, that central unifying idea. But now we're going to call it a proposition. So by coming up with a proposition, a clear proposition, that is going to be the most effective way for you as a speaker to communicate your ideas and to get your audience to be persuaded. It's also going to help you organize most effectively your entire speech. So this thing called a proposition is what we're going to go over. And so it says there, what is a proposition? So where have you heard the word proposition before? Absolutely. So you have laws, right? So like and if you've ever voted, and if you can vote in the United States, there's oftentimes these things called propositions that you can vote on. If you've heard them, yes. Proposition, Prop 2, Prop 8, Prop 19, right? These propositions are designed for what? For you to...
I think it's like for us to vote on before it becomes a law.
Yeah. This is our opportunity to like create laws, to create rules, or to take away laws or rules as well. So proposition, if you even break it down like a proposal, right? When the chat asked me to marry him, he got down on one knee and he proposed. And what he did is that he hoped that I would say no. He hoped I would say, yes. Write this down. Your proposition is what you want your audience to say yes to. By the end of the speech, your audience should be saying yes to that. Yes, I agree. Yes, I'm going to go out and do that action. Yes, I would take that step. But the pickle with propositions is that they are always written for a yes response. And it's important for you as civic members of society to remember that in the case that you can vote and you do go vote for a proposition, know that the way that the wording is done is for you to say yes to it. So there was a big controversy back in the day about this Prop 8. And I don't know if any of you all remember it because you were a little bit younger with Prop 8. But Prop 8 had to do with same-sex marriage in California. It went to the Supreme Court. It got overturned in like 2013. I remember because I was on my way to Hawaii. Anyway, that Prop 8, so at the time in California, same-sex marriage was legal. And Prop 8 put out a big campaign, and anybody who didn't read about Prop 8, who wasn't educated about what the terms were, who didn't really know what the law was, who didn't know anything before they walked into their voting booth and punched their ticket, what happened was that they saw like same-sex marriage, and people were like, oh yeah, same-sex marriage, that sounds good, and so they voted yes. But in that case, a yes vote meant no, right? So it was actually you voting yes for no same-sex marriage. And so that is important to understand, that many of you will also have these speeches where you want your audience to say yes to also not doing something, right? So like to persuade all of you not to smoke. That by the end of it, you would be saying yes to not smoking. Does that make sense? So keep that in mind about reading for your future understanding of propositions, but also note that the ultimate thing we want here is for our audience to be able to say yes. So there are different types of propositions. And there are 3 different types of propositions that you will always find in persuasion. They are propositions of policy, and they're written already there for you, like on the 3 pages. Proposition of policy, propositions of value, and propositions of fact. For the purpose of our class and the time that we have, we are only going to be doing propositions of policy and propositions of fact. So you can cross out the value as it is. So propositions of policy and propositions of fact are what we are going to go over. And it's important to understand these as well from an argumentative standpoint. Have you ever been engaged in an argument with somebody and you're never able to get to a conclusion? I'm going to guess yes. Now that may have been because you both have such staunch beliefs that you're not willing to compromise and give up on something else. But many of the debates that we hear in society, or when you watch debates on TV, the problem is that they're actually arguing different propositions. So for example, this great abortion debate that continues to go on throughout our society, when you hear people debate abortion, it's oftentimes that somebody will start with, well, that's a life and it's not right to take a life. And then you'll have somebody else saying, it's legal for me to do whatever I want with my body. Those are 2 different arguments. One has to do with a value and one has to do with a policy. So it doesn't matter how long you argue for, you're never going to get to a conclusion because you're arguing 2 different things completely. So it's important that you have a good starting point and that you're arguing the same proposition. So that if somebody says, yeah, well, it's not right, and that's where you can just stop it. Well, I'm not saying that it's not right. I'm saying that what it is legal. So let's argue it from that standpoint. And then we can get going. But starting points are really important in argumentation, that you are arguing the exact same thing, that you have a good understanding of what the language is and what it means. So the first type of proposition that I want to go over for each of us is this proposition of policy. So what I'm also going to do here is I'm going to show you that policies, when we think about policies, what's typically what you think of? I generated this list in my last class that policies, we think about them as things like rules, right, or laws. So these rules that we have, even like at school, there's specific rules. There's rules for our classroom, right, that we have, that we adhere to. There's rules and standards that we follow for the university or for the institution. Then there's specific laws that maybe even govern our city. There's specific laws that govern our state. There's specific laws that govern our country individually. So there's multitudes of different laws. But then there's also these policies like standards and guidelines. It's like if you think about your work, there's specific standards for how to behave, or guidelines for how to dress, or how to speak to customers, or what type of punctuality you have to have, or the standards that you must meet in order to keep your job, right? So standards and guidelines can also go under that. But policies, we don't always have to think about as something like a law to be changed. Now, yes, it can be. And I want to encourage you that if there is something out there in regards to rules or laws or policies that exist within the world around you that are harmful, that are problematic, that are out of date, that don't help anymore, that exist for the purpose of oppression even, then those are things that you can identify, that you can assert that these policies need to be changed. However, propositions of policy don't simply have to go along with these rules and these laws, these guidelines, and these standards. Because by definition, a proposition of policy, I'll write this one down, all it's doing is it's a speech that urges your audience to take action on something. So it urges your audience to take action on something. So again, remembering the beliefs and the values and the attitudes that one's audience has, how are we going to move them to take action? Now, we've seen action before with laws and rules, right? Like we vote for specific things. We vote even for specific individuals to represent us because they have our best interests in mind. We hope we can start to encourage legislation change. But the other things that we can do is that a policy also, or the umbrella of a policy proposition also includes taking action on other things. So simple things like to persuade my audience to drink 8 glasses of water a day, to persuade my audience to donate blood, to persuade my audience to volunteer at Habitat for Humanity, to persuade my audience. I had a student last semester who gave this amazing speech about, she had a sociology class that she thought was really great and really effective. So it was to persuade my audience to take this sociology class. For all students here at SMC, we have the opportunity to teach that. Take that. To persuade my audience to take a swim class or take a public speaking class. Are there things that you enjoy doing, that you enjoy working with, that you think are beneficial? Those are all things that you could encourage your audience also to take action on. To go see a tutor, to take advantage of, maybe there's a resource on campus that has served you really well that you want other students to be aware of. That could be something to take action on. So note that taking action doesn't always have to be for us to vote for something or a policy or a guideline, but it can also be for us to take actions that are going to help our social and civic lives, if you will.
Yeah. Do you think it's harder to, when you're doing the persuasive speech, it's more challenging to have somebody not do something like quit smoking versus doing what you just mentioned? You know what I'm saying?
Say it one more time.
Well, I'm just thinking it just seems more challenging if we're asking somebody not to do something that we have to make sure that there's certain action in not doing it, or what are the actions we can take so that we can't, you know what I mean, so that we don't smoke.
Absolutely. And that will be determined in how you organize your main points, which is the thing that we'll come up with. Because there's a whole psychology as to how to get somebody to do something, and that typically has to do with your proposition. So depending on your proposition, there's a specific way that we'll organize those main points, and that's how we'll come up with that psychology of getting people to do things. And you'll see that the same structure and format is used in almost all policy speeches. That's the other good news, is that when you hear policy speeches from now, like a speech that they want you to vote for them, it'll literally be like problem, cause, solution, organize. It's the same pattern that you use because it works on people, because of what they want to know or how they want So I'll go over that. Maybe it'll make it a little bit more clear when it comes up. Yeah, sure. But there also are two different types of policies, and that's an important thing to remember as well. Propositions of policy have to do with taking action, but the first is action for passive agreement. Absolutely. This is whereby your audience may not be able to take action right away on something. So we want to agree that yes, this is a good action to take, but maybe potentially we can't take it right now. So like an example could be something like teaching or I'm giving a persuasive speech to a bunch of sophomores in high school about to persuade them to vote. That can be passive agreement, and that's still an action that when that opportunity or time comes, we can definitely do it. To persuade my audience to stand up to online bullying, right? That, am I doing it right now in my chair? No, but the next time that I experience it, that action, I can agree that that's an action that I should in fact take, or I should in fact do. But then there's also, those are ones, so for passive agreement, ones that people can't act on right now, but they potentially could in the future, or that they can simply agree with something needing to be done. So for example, to persuade my audience that Santa Monica College must put in an additional 1,000 parking spots. Now the key here is going to be, of course, your audience, and we'll talk about that in a second, but can any of you vote on that? No, you don't really have you're not in charge of making that decision, you're not in charge of making that action. But we can persuade you that that action is necessary, and you can passively agree in that way. But then there's immediate action. These are the things that you can go out and step out and do like right away. And so again, that idea of to persuade my audience to drink 8 glasses of water a day. Oh yeah, to drink 8 glasses of water a day. You can start doing that today. To persuade my audience to start exercising. We could do that. To persuade my audience to go vegetarian 1 day a week. Interesting. To persuade my audience to floss. So important. To persuade my audience to sign up for a public speaking class, right? These are things that we can really take this immediate action on, or if we're doing this voting, to go out and volunteer, to sign up. And the way that this will be determined will be in our solutions, whereby we're going to give you the steps to go out and do it, or we're going to talk about some ways that this could get done. And we'll get around to that in a little bit. But propositions of policy, again, always have to do with action. And before we even get into going into more detail about this policy, I want to go back over here to what each of you are going to have to do for your assignment. If you recall, there will be these elements that we need to look at and that you're going to need to identify for your homework. And that's writing out your general purpose, your proposition, and your thesis statement. And the general purpose, we know from before, was to inform. And then the other type of general purpose that any speech could fall under would be to entertain. But for this speech, guess what yours is going to be? To persuade. So that's all you're going to write to that first part of your homework. Check, it's already done. Yay, thanks, Amanda. To persuade. Great. That's the most broad idea. But now we're going to narrow down to this thing called our proposition. And that's going to take the place of this central idea. This proposition is one singular statement that you want your audience to say yes to. You do not want to say, to persuade my audience to donate blood because it's good for them and because it's going to be beneficial to the state of the world. Those are 3 different propositions, and that's going to be way too complicated. To persuade my audience to donate blood, there's your proposition. That's when it makes sense and it becomes clear, and it's one succinct claim of one succinct claim. So the proposition, in order to write it, all you do is you bring down your general purpose, so you write to persuade, and then again, we have this key here, my audience. like I said during our informational speech, your audience for that was your audience, the people that are in front of you. But this audience also has a great potential to change. Because let's say that I did want to persuade, that we build, let's just say that we build that parking lot of 1,000 spaces. Well, what I could in fact do is find out exactly to whom would I be speaking. Who would that message need to go to? Who should we be talking to? And instead of putting my audience, you will replace that with like the board of trustees or the parking enforcement office or whomever will be in charge of it. So your audience may change and shift a little bit, especially if you have some rules and laws that you are looking to either repeal or to replace or to amend. Who would be the audience that would be responsible for that? And do you want to take on that challenge of addressing that audience or not? And that would be completely up to you. But if you do have a specific group that you know that you're talking to, so let's say, for example, that you had an audience that was against gender equity education, right? You could replace like to persuade my audience of anti-gender education parents, let's say, and you can put them in there instead. To persuade the U.S. government, to persuade the SMC trustees, to persuade my parents. Because how much different is that audience if you were like, to persuade my parents to let me go out? Now everything's going to change down here, right? The way that your language changes, the way that your supporting material changes, how you start to play on the values and the beliefs and the attitudes. I mean, it's all a different ball game. So note that in your audience, you can designate towards your specific audience. You have a live, participating, active audience here who could do something. But then your follow-up word, we talked before that in our informative speech, it was to inform my audience about, because about is an informative word, about Michael Jordan, right? But instead, for persuasion, we want to make that concrete statement. To persuade my audience that. So if you can all put that down in your proposition to start off, you know that you're on the right track for a persuasive proposition. So to persuade my audience, that is the key word that you wanted to look for. Now, propositions of policy, you can almost always identify them because it will have the terms should or should not within it. It does not have to, because, for example, to persuade my audience that they should drink Aquafina water, you're like, ooh, should policy. To persuade my audience to drink Aquafina water, no should, but I'm still asking you to do what? To drink water, to take action, right? So it may not always include the words should or should not, but if that assists you in making sure that you have your policy correctly written, then feel free to do so. But what we want to do is make sure that, again, you have one clear idea and one clear statement or claim. So I'm going to say, for example, to persuade my audience that they should not drink and drive. Proposition of policy. And this, do you think, is for like passive agreement?
No.
No, I really want you to get out there and not drink and drive. I mean, if you don't drink, okay, yes, then
And then like,
you agree with you. But
like for supporting material, like, you could use like Mothers Against Drunk Driving or something like that.
yeah, that's a credible source.
She was on the, Facebook talking about it the other day. Like, she had like a live forum about it. It was
Yeah.
interesting.
I'm always interested in this thing, right? But here's the in order to create your thesis, remember, your thesis is a simple combination of your and oh my gosh, propositions and main points. Remember before it was like, oh, it's my central idea, my main points, to get to know me better, tell you about my job, my family, whatever, right? Persuade my audience that they should not drink and drive. Now what do we need? Main points! Okay, good. Make sure that this proposition and this proposition are the exact same, the one that you write down here. So we're just going to bring it down to persuade my audience that they should not drink and drive. That's just the proposition. Now I need my main points. And so, if you recall from the last time, and when I say last time, I mean informative speaking. When we did informative speaking, we talked about how, for example, if you had a person, you were going to organize your speech either chronologically or topically. Because for me to be like, hey, y'all, I'm going to talk to you about Michael Jordan by describing the bottom of his body, the middle of his body, and then the top of his body. Is that going to tell us anything about Michael Jordan? No. It's a weird way to organize things. This goes along with the same idea of like organizing two different propositions or arguing two different propositions. The way that we organize the main points for a proposition of policy are key in order to let that go. I think it's mine. Oh, say it. Are going to be key to making the effective argument. So the main points set up the argument. If you have a proposition of policy, you are going to have three main points. Get excited. And it is organized, and I know it says it on there, like how are propositions of policy organized? Well, this is how propositions of policy are organized, with three main points. And the first main point is always going to be the problems with not having your policy. Second one is going to be the causes, or you can say the reasons, as to why the current situation or policy exists. And then finally, you will offer some solutions to putting your policy in place. So in lay terms, let me give it to you for this drinking and driving. Or let me actually set up the psychology. When you were younger, and whoever raised you said, clean your room. Go clean your room. Your first answer wasn't, no. Your first response was,
Why?
Why? Why do I need to clean my room? I am perfectly happy here. This is not bothering me. These clothes on the floor can stay here. This is fine. All of you, at this point in your life, decide whether or not you're going to take action pretty much every day. And if you're going to get up, in my language, if you're going to get up anybody up off their ass, you have to first establish that there's a problem with whatever they are not doing already. Because otherwise people are perfectly complacent, sitting around, not exercising, not drinking their water, not cleaning up their room. So the first thing is to establish that there are problems with you not taking that action, or there are problems with the law that exists, or there are problems that are existing out there because maybe a policy isn't set up. So in lay terms, our first main point, as we would write it here, to persuade my audience that they should not drink and drive, I would say by first describing the problems. Anybody want to play with it? Problems of what? Yeah, drinking and driving, right? So we need to lay out that there are problems. So what are the problems with drinking and driving, people? That's for darn sure. It's dangerous because? Okay, fantastic. So the first thing, we can be in an accident, right? And we can damage ourselves, or we can damage some property. And this is all a big deal, because if you're in an accident, when you have alcohol in your system, are they going to be like, oh, too bad for you? No! Right? You're definitely going to get in trouble. You're going to definitely get a DUI with that. You could potentially hurt yourself. Then you're going to have to pay for somebody else's property. Who even knows what could happen, right? What else is going to happen? You said it already. You said, or you could kill someone. Oh my gosh. Okay, good. Kill someone. You could kill someone or yourself. Absolutely. Now, if you don't kill yourself, but you kill someone else, now you have this thing. It's called vehicular manslaughter. And now you get to go to jail because you decided to drink and drive. And then there's that other thing that nobody really thinks about, these two. Because when you get in the car drinking and driving, everyone's scared for that one thing. Oh, shoot, I hope I don't get, because I don't want to get up. Because a DUI is a problem. And it is a huge problem. And that's like we can talk about, right? So like, if we can't play on value here, let me talk to you all students about how this reflects on you, personally. So even if we're talking about accidents or killing someone, we are going to want to generate evidence that comes from people your age, that comes from situations maybe around your hometown that you understand. So that's the type of evidence we're going to want to show. Not how many people nationwide or worldwide know. We want to narrow that down so it affects you specifically. But this idea with the DUI, you know how much a DUI is?
$10,000.
Yes, it's $10,000 if you get a DUI. Do you have $10,000? That's just all the court fees and all the fines, and then you have to take classes every week, and then your license is suspended for a year. You can drive to work, and that's all you can do, and your car insurance goes up. You know how much your car insurance goes up to? Yes! It's like between $600 and $800 a month. It's crazy town. And do you know how long that stays on your record? Mothers Against Drunk Driving. They just pulled it up too.
Is it 6 years?
10 years now. 10 years that's on your thing. So let's just say that all of you have been going to school and you've been working so hard and you have straight A's and you're so excited. You're like, I'm going to go get a job. And then there's another student who hasn't worked nearly as hard as you, maybe didn't have an internship or something, didn't have all those grades, but when you have to fill out a job application and it says, well, have you ever been convicted? You're going to have to say what? Yes. And they're going to say what for? And you're like, because I was irresponsible and I drank and drove. And who would you hire over that? I would hire the kid who was at least responsible enough to not drink and drive, right? So DUIs are also a big issue. So there's so many problems with drinking and driving that we must establish, right? tell your students why. It's like my mom was like, Amanda, if there was an earthquake, because again, like there's two things I'm scared of is like death and jail. So just in case you ever want to appeal to me, like I won't make it in jail. It freaks me out. I couldn't even watch Orange is the New Black or watch the first 10 minutes, and I was like crying when she was on her way to jail. I was like, I can't do it. So, like, I'd be like, why? My mom would be, Amanda, if there is an earthquake and you have all these clothes all over your floor, you won't be able to get to the doorway, and then you could potentially die. Now, mind you, that's like a hyperbole, dramatic. Amanda, you need to like clean up this pizza next to your bed. No, I want an extra bite of it. I'm fine with it being there. But if I want it in the middle of the night, Amanda, in the middle of the night, ants will come in and they will come into that pizza, but then they may crawl into your ear and start eating your brain, and then you will die. Right? So it's like whatever is motivating us to get up there and do something. Now we want to be honest with it, but potentially.
No, but there was a show I was watching where that actually happened to someone. They got a bug went in their ear.
Oh, yeah.
Eating their brain.
Yes.
So that's a good argument.
It is a good argument. Don't know how that's happening. But then we have our next main point. Because many people are still drinking and driving, right? We all know that people are still drinking and driving. Yeah? Alright.
Yeah.
So we have to talk about those reasons as to why, and this is where we address our opposition. So it may not necessarily be about drinking and driving, but it's like, to persuade my audience that Photoshop doesn't need to be used on models and magazines anymore. It shouldn't be used. But what are the causes as to why it is still used? Right? So what are the causes as to why people are still drinking and driving? What are the reasons that they drink and drive? It's like those ideas of like, I have to be home, right? I don't want to leave my car. Or my favorite one, I'm not that drunk. I'm only had 2, I'm fine. I'm fine, I promise, I'm fine. I haven't had that much to drink, I'm fine. Right? I'm fine. Now, we don't simply list out the reasons, but this is where I want to encourage you to go back to the pro and con and start to look at that counter argument. Because what we want to do is we want to address why people may be against us, but then what we really want to do is we want to show them why that idea is not correct. So we'll never just list these ideas on their own. Instead, we need to provide counter evidence. So if it's saying something like, I'm fine, I've only had a couple drinks. You may have heard people say this before. Well, you can be fine, technically. But the bottom line is, and then you can put up like the blood alcohol level. It doesn't matter if you've had 2 drinks and you don't feel anything and you can walk a line and pass a test. The second that you breathe into that machine, it is going to say something much different than you are fine. And you are then going to go to jail and have your DUI all over again. So just because you're fine, in the eyes of the law, you are not. So it is no longer an effective excuse for you to drink and drive. And that's why you shouldn't do it, right? So we will make the argument that proves it differently. Getting home, doing the car, whatever. So we just have to argue with our audience, tell them logically, like, that's not an okay thing to do. Why is that not an okay thing to do? Like the great trans bathroom debate, like we did problem, cause, solution, right? The causes as to why some people believe that that there should not be neutral bathrooms. It's like, oh, because then people will be assaulted. I could be assaulted every day in the bathroom, and people are assaulted every day in the bathroom, and it's not by trans people. Like, how many of those experiences are? That would be a good thing to give. So that's not an argument to make, and it has nothing to do with why we shouldn't be having these bathrooms, right? So that's the type of counter arguments you'll want to provide. So then your second main point will be something like by first describing the problems of drinking and driving, the reasons people drink and drive, and finally, what do you think we're going to do, everybody? Offer some solutions. Now the key here is that your solutions need to be able to show that they can take away these problems. That if I do these things, this will in fact go away. Or it will in fact fact alleviate, or it can help to assist in whatever it is. So the solutions that you provide is also a place where I encourage you to start your research sometimes. Because if you know really an area that you want to go into, and like I said, you start looking at like organizations who maybe are already working on that behalf, they have potential and possible solutions that can help, that can work, that you could do. If you're talking about a particular policy that you want to change, then the solution would be like to suggest the different things that need to be written instead. And then provide us with evidence that would like maybe hypothesize or prophesize, or maybe we can analogically reason, which I'll talk about later, like it happened well over here, so it could also happen over here. Here's the evidence to prove that it will work. So we offer those solutions. So that's when we say, first strike problems drink driving, the reasons people drink drive, and finally solutions to not drink and drive. And this is where it's also important to come up with those novel ideas and novel evidence about drinking and driving. Because how many people are still drinking and driving? A ton, right? You know, like, oh, get a cab, do whatever. But like, what's new and out there? In Santa Monica, they have these scooter helpers. You ever heard of this? So you can, wherever you are in Santa Monica, if you want your car home, you call these individuals, they scooter to your car, they fold up their scooter, they put it in your car, they drive you home, and then they scoot back. Great, now I have my car home and I'm a thank you, right? It's through a company, it's the whole thing. There's all these different types of ways. Yes, get an Uber, get off, but an Uber's not going to get your car home, so there's different ways that we can address this. And we'll talk about how to lay out these solutions a little bit more. I'm going to continue to record this for the next 10 minutes so that I can do the proposition of fact. But what I want to encourage you just to take note of is that on your Canvas page, on your Canvas page, there's a key. On your Canvas page, there is a all the way down here, as it goes in order, library setting sources, introductions, conclusions. Here it is. Persuasive proposition and thesis approval. Here's the date for you on there, and you're going to simply click on it and then go ahead and put that information in there. So if you have a proposition of policy, you know that the pattern of organization used is problem, cause, solution. That's pretty much what you know. That's how your main points will be organized. So keep that in mind for your homework. And for those of you who need to go, you may go. For those of you who want to just stay for these next 10 minutes, I'm going to go ahead and talk about what a proposition of fact is. And I'll just keep talking in the interest of time. You feel free to just sneak on out. And you can always watch this video, of course, online. The proposition of fact is going to be the same way. We'll have our general purpose. Which is to persuade. We still need to establish some kind of proposition, which will be, bring this down, to persuade my audience, and then the key word, that. But now what's a proposition of fact? So a proposition of fact is going to, is a speech, well, no, proposition of fact, okay. It asserts the truth or falsity of a claim. So it asserts the truth or falsity of a claim. This is where we get to contingent issues, something that is debatable. To persuade my audience that college is beneficial, is it really debatable? I guess in context you could, like if you're not getting that specific job or whatever. But there's certain topics that have already been proven as fact that may not need to be discussed. However, there are still outstanding debatable ideas that people are going back and forth about a lot of times. That although there's evidence to prove that it is in fact factual, there is a counter argument that could prove otherwise. So to persuade my audience that exercising daily is beneficial to their overall health. In this case, I don't want you to take action on something. What I want you to do is what? Simply say, yeah, wow, it is beneficial to my overall health. That's interesting. Never knew that about that before, right? To persuade my audience that advertisements that objectify or that sexualize women lead to oppression. People are like, what? Does it? Well, let me show you some ways that it does so. And then it's like, oh, yeah, well, I drew that conclusion, huh? But a proposition of fact seeks to assert the truth or the falsity of a claim. So in this case, we're suggesting that we believe to be true. But we can also prove something to be false as well. To persuade my audience that a bachelor's degree will not benefit. Let's do this. To persuade my audience that a man never landed on the moon. Something that has been suggested as being true, we are now going to try to persuade you that it is, in fact, not true. To persuade my audience that, so I was like trying to think about like college, like right now the big push is for like trade, to have trades, because trades are the things that will actually have jobs in the future. So it's like to persuade my audience that trade school will benefit the career of a person over a bachelor's degree from a general university. Okay, so let's see how it's going to do that. So we can prove the truth or the falsity of something. So as it says in some of these examples here for the proposition of fact, if you're looking at them, it's, converting to solar energy can save homeowners money. Is that debatable? Yeah, because some people think that you can save you money, and then other people are like, yeah, well, now they have to pay it off in 10 years, and it's more of a thing, and I still have the tax on it, right? So the government is withholding information on UFOs. Ooh, isn't it sneaky? Neil Armstrong was the first man to step foot on the moon, or was he? Death is inevitable. Is it? I don't know. Obesity causes health problems. Yes, it does. Exercising every day is beneficial to one's overall health. We can definitely argue that. Why? Also, because exercising every day, some people will say that you don't have to exercise every day. Some people say that you can walk moderately 3 times a week, and that can be beneficial, to your overall health. But the key with the proposition of fact is that your main points are organized topically, like you have done before. So if I'm saying that it's beneficial to their overall health, that's the fact that I want to prove. My main points should show the benefits to their health, and I'm going to prove that to you. So I can say something like, by, first describing its physical benefits, and then describing its mental benefits. And these would be my two main points. But remember, topically, for a 5 to 7 minute speech, you can have between 2 to 5 main points. So 2 to 5 facts that will prove your proposition as being true. Does that make sense to you? So to persuade my audience that majoring in theater arts will benefit you as a leader in the future. I had a student who did a speech like that, and I was so amazed by it. It was like, it will benefit you as a leader through the process of directing. It will benefit you as a leader through the process of acting, and it will benefit you as a leader through the process of it was like working behind the scenes. So then they talked about all those leadership skills that you get within it. It was really an interesting one. To persuade my audience that earthquakes can be predicted. And that was one of my students did a big earthquake speech last semester. Because they say that they can't be predicted, but she was suggesting they can. And here's why they do it. And they can be predicted by, they can be predicted by, and they can be predicted by. So utilizing that same language also when you're writing your main points, like it's beneficial because, it's also beneficial because it's beneficial. So whatever the fact that you're trying to prove to us, try to utilize that same language again and again. So propositions of fact are organized topically, and if you notice this is a factual statement, is it urging me to take action?
Mm-hmm. No?
No. It's not telling me to go out and exercise. But by the end of the speech, I may want to, because it's told me all the great benefits for it. But it's not encouraged me to go do so. So I don't have to provide you with ways to do it or encourage you like how to do it or anything. I'm simply telling you it's good for your health. And that's what I want to persuade you, that you have that knowledge, that you know it, and that someday, should you be faced with the idea of like exercising, you're like, darn, that is good for my health. Does that make sense to y'all? So whether you're doing the proposition of fact or you're doing the proposition of policy, that's going to be your assignment to do. You're more than welcome, again, to email me beforehand if you want me to look at it and tell you, oh yeah, this is what you have, but we don't want to combine propositions. Again, make sure that you are keeping your propositions to one clear statement, that it's either an action or it's a fact. Or you can also do predictions as a fact, just as a side note. To persuade my audience, we will have an earthquake in the next 2 months. To persuade my audience that the Lakers will win the 2018 championship. Did I get my time machine? No. There's a bunch of people on ESPN every year who sit around and go, the Lakers are going to do it. And you know why they're going to do it? Because they got no rookies on their team, because they have a great coaching staff, because they have 400 home games. And you're like, oh, all right, maybe the Lakers have a chance. Does that make sense to you? Okay, any last questions? All right, smart cookies. So, post your assignment.